Officer discovers a 3-year-old girl alone in a parking lot. She whispers, "Mommy doesn't want me anymore." The bitter December wind howled through the empty parking lot, swirling snowflakes around a small figure huddled against a concrete pillar. Officer Jason Daniels nearly missed a tiny girl in the growing darkness, no more than 3 years old, dressed in a thin jacket and worn-out shoes. Her dark hair was tangled with snowflakes, her small hands red from the cold. As he approached, she looked up with eyes that seemed too old for her young face. "My mommy doesn't want me anymore," she whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in the winter wind. Those 6 words would change both their lives forever. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. If you're new or haven't subscribed, please click subscribe. It means the world to us. The precinct buzzed with its usual evening activity, but Officer Jason Daniels sat quietly at his desk, his fingers absently tracing the edge of a silver photo frame. Inside, a smiling 3-year-old girl with pigtails held a bright yellow balloon, his daughter Sarah, lost to a drunk driving accident exactly 1 year ago. The memory of that rainy October night still haunted him. The screeching tires, the shattering glass, his desperate attempts to reach her through the wreckage. "Daniels, you're up for more patrol," Sergeant Martinez called out, breaking through his reverie. His colleagues exchanged knowing looks. More patrol. The assignment they gave to officers they thought needed easy duty. Jason knew what they whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. That he wasn't the same since Sarah's death, that he'd lost his edge, that he was too emotionally unstable for serious cases. Perhaps they were right. The past year had been a blur of grief counseling sessions, sleepless nights, and a divorce that left him living alone in a small apartment where Sarah's unopened Christmas presents still sat in the closet. His wife couldn't bear to look at him anymore. He reminded her too much of what they'd lost. The department psychologist had recommended extended leave, but Jason couldn't bring himself to stay home with his thoughts. "I'm fine with more patrol," he said, grabbing his coat. His colleagues didn't understand that every shift, every moment on duty, was his way of trying to make amends. He had failed to protect his own daughter. Perhaps he could still protect others. The mall's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows as he made his routine checks. Each pass by the children's play area sent a familiar ache through his chest. A year ago, he would have been there on his day off, watching Sarah chase bubbles or ride the coin-operated train. Now he walked past quickly, averting his eyes from the happy families. His supervisor had been increasingly concerned about his obsession with child-related cases. Last month, he'd spent 3 days tracking down a lost boy who had simply wandered to his grandmother's house. The week before, he'd stayed 4 hours after his shift to help a teenage runaway reconnect with her parents. "You can't save everyone," the supervisor had warned, "and you can't bring her back by saving others." But what they saw as unstable behavior, Jason recognized as something else, a deeper understanding of the fragility of childhood happiness. Since losing Sarah, he developed an almost supernatural ability to spot children in distress. A slight tremor in a voice, a forced smile, a flinch at a raised hand. Signs he might have missed before now screamed for his attention. His fellow officers used to admire his dedication. Now they treated him like broken glass, careful with their words, especially when children were involved in cases. The department had quietly moved him from homicide to community patrol, citing stress management, but Jason knew it was because they didn't trust his judgment anymore. "You need to let go," his ex-wife had said during their last conversation. "Sarah wouldn't want you to live like this." But how could he explain that every child he helped felt like a small redemption, a tiny step toward forgiveness he couldn't give himself? The winter wind bit through his uniform as he started his exterior patrol of the mall. Christmas decorations twinkled mockingly. This would have been Sarah's favorite time of year. Last Christmas, they'd planned to build a snowman family in the backyard. The tiny mittens he'd bought for her were still in their packaging, never worn. His therapist called it survivor's guilt, this compulsion to protect every child he encountered. But Jason knew it was more than that. It was his penance, his purpose, the only way he knew how to honor Sarah's memory. Every child saved, every family kept whole, was a small victory against the darkness that had claimed his daughter. As he rounded the corner of the parking structure, the wind carried a sound that made him freeze. A child's sob, almost lost in the howling winter air. His colleagues would tell him to call it in first, to wait for backup, to not let his personal tragedy cloud his judgment. But Jason was already moving toward the sound, his heart pounding with a familiar mix of hope and dread. He didn't know then that this moment would test everything he thought he knew about loss, redemption, and the true meaning of saving someone. In the harsh glare of the parking lot lights, Ella appeared even smaller than her 3 years. Her dark curls were matted and tangled, dusted with snowflakes that refused to melt. She had been out in the cold long enough for the frost to settle. Her once pink jacket was grimy and torn at the sleeves, a size too small for even her tiny frame. The mittens she wore didn't match. One was red wool, unraveling at the edges, the other a dirty white synthetic that offered little protection against the December chill. But it was her eyes that stopped Jason in his tracks. Large, dark, and unnaturally alert, they held the weary wisdom of someone who had seen too much. Too soon, they darted between his face and his uniform, measuring, assessing, carrying the weariness of a child who had learned not to trust adults. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, each word carefully formed as if she had rehearsed them. "My mommy doesn't want me anymore." Her small hands clutched a worn backpack, its once bright butterflies now faded and stained. Inside, Jason would later discover, were the careful preparations of a desperate mother. A change of clothes, a toothbrush, a small photo album, and a letter that would remain unopened for days. Most heartbreaking was the carefully packed lunch of a peanut butter sandwich, an apple, and a chocolate bar, as if her mother had been sending her off to school rather than abandoning her in a mall parking lot. Ella's movements betrayed a child used to making herself invisible. She sat perfectly still, taking up as little space as possible, her shoulders hunched against more than just a cold. When Jason knelt beside her, she didn't flinch away, a response that worried him more than if she had shown fear. This was a child accustomed to strangers, to being handled by unknown adults, to adapting to survive. "I'm Jason," he said softly, noticing how she tracked every movement of his hands. "Are you cold?" Ella gave a slight nod, but her grip on the backpack never loosened. When he offered his coat, she accepted it with the solemn dignity of a much older child, carefully arranging it around herself like armor. The traces of neglect were evident. Her shoes were worn through at the toes, her socks mismatched and damp, her fingernails bitten to the quick, and a fading bruise peeked out from under her sleeve, not necessarily from abuse, but certainly from a life where gentleness had been rare. Yet there were also signs of love. Her hair, though tangled now, had been recently cut in a neat style. The lunch in her backpack had been packed with care, the sandwich cut into precise triangles with the crust removed. Most telling was the small silver locket around her neck, clean and polished despite the general state of her appearance. When Jason asked about it, Ella's free hand instinctively clutched it, and for the first time, emotion cracked through her careful composure. "Mommy said never take it off," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes but not falling. "She said it's for remembering." Her vocabulary was advanced for her age, suggesting a child who had spent more time with adults than other children. She spoke in incomplete, careful sentences, offering information sparingly, as if each word might be used against her. When Jason asked about her home, she shook her head. Asked about her father, she went completely still, her small body rigid with tension. Only when Jason mentioned finding her mother did she show real animation. "She's sick," Ella said urgently, her voice trembling. "She needs medicine. But the bad men—" She stopped abruptly, pressing her lips together, retreating into that eerie stillness. It was the most she had spoken at once, and she seemed to regret it immediately. The snow fell harder now, but Ella showed no interest in seeking shelter. She sat with the patient resignation of someone accustomed to waiting, to being left behind, to having no control over her fate. When Jason suggested moving somewhere warmer, she looked up at him with those ancient eyes and asked a question that would haunt him for months. Will they hurt her more if I go with you? The question hung in the frigid air between them, heavy with implications too weighty for her small shoulders to bear. In that moment, Jason realized he wasn't just dealing with an abandoned child. He was facing someone who had been forced to carry terrible secrets, a 3-year-old burdened with adult responsibilities. And somewhere in the city, a mother's desperate gamble was unfolding, with stakes higher than anyone yet understood. Winter had tightened its grip on the city, transforming the once bustling Oakwood Mall into a fortress of shadows and fading light. The massive parking structure loomed against the darkening sky, its concrete levels stacked like dominoes waiting to fall. Christmas decorations clung desperately to the building's facade, twinkling lights and plastic wreaths that only emphasized the desolation of the empty spaces between them. The mall itself stood as a monument to fading prosperity. Once the crown jewel of the city's district, it now bore the scars of decline that even holiday cheer couldn't mask. Empty storefronts dotted the lower level, their windows covered in brown paper and faded signs. The remaining stores were a mix of discount outlets and struggling local businesses, their owners watching their doors with increasingly desperate eyes. The surrounding neighborhood told its own story of decline. What had once been a solidly middle-class area had slowly succumbed to economic hardship. Victorian homes that had housed generations of families now stood divided into apartments, their elegant facades crumbling beneath peeling paint. The streets were lined with bare trees, their branches reaching toward the gray sky like pleading fingers. Recent budget cuts had left many streetlights dark, creating pools of shadow that grew longer and deeper with each passing day. Beyond the mall's immediate vicinity lay the industrial district, a maze of abandoned factories and warehouses. The largest, the old Patterson Steel Works, had closed 5 years ago, taking 2,000 jobs with it. Its massive chimney still dominated the skyline, but now it stood silent, a sentinel over the community's broken dreams. The factory's closure had triggered a domino effect, toppling small businesses and forcing families to move, leaving behind empty homes and fractured communities. The police precinct where Jason worked occupied an aging brick building 6 blocks from the mall. Its windows were frosted with age and winter, the blue paint on its door fading and chipped. Inside, overworked officers dealt with the consequences of the area's decline, increased petty theft, domestic disturbances, and the growing presence of drug activity. Budget cuts had left them understaffed and overwhelmed, forcing them to prioritize major crimes over community policing. The local women's shelter, tucked away in a converted church basement 3 streets over, operated beyond capacity. Its small windows glowed with warm light even on the coldest nights, a beacon for those with nowhere else to turn. The shelter's director, Sister Margaret, had seen the changing face of need in their community. No longer just victims of domestic violence, but whole families displaced by poverty, illness, and desperation. Between the mall and the shelter lay St. Mary's Hospital, its emergency room lights casting a perpetual blue glow over the snow-covered sidewalks. The hospital, like many others, struggled with increasing numbers of uninsured patients and dwindling resources. Its waiting room had become a reluctant shelter for those with nowhere else to go, especially on the coldest nights. The weather had turned brutal, even by local standards. Meteorologists called it the worst winter in 30 years, but the old-timers said they'd never seen anything like it. Temperature records fell like the relentless snow, week after week of bitter cold that froze pipes, killed car batteries, and drove the homeless to seek shelter in increasingly desperate places. This was the world Ella had been surviving in, a landscape of fading dreams and desperate choices, where even the strongest struggled to keep hope alive. The few people still brave enough to venture out hurried between warm spaces, heads down against the wind, avoiding eye contact with those less fortunate. The sound of sirens echoed through the streets, their wails muffled by the falling snow. The city's social services, already stretched thin, had begun to crack under the combined pressure of increasing need and decreasing resources. The local food bank had started turning people away by mid-month. The school district reported record numbers of homeless students, while teachers quietly bought extra supplies with their own money to help struggling families. Yet amid this bleakness, pockets of humanity persisted. The corner grocery store still extended credit to longtime customers who couldn't make ends meet. The local diner kept a pot of coffee going all night for the homeless who needed a warm place to sit. Neighbors still checked on elderly residents, sharing what little they had when times were hardest. It was into this complex tapestry of struggle and survival that Ella's story would weave itself, becoming both a symbol of the community's failures and, eventually, its capacity for redemption. The stage was set for a drama that would expose the dark underbelly of a city in decline, while also revealing the unexpected heroes who still fought to keep hope alive in the longest, coldest winter anyone could remember. The snow had intensified when Jason first spotted the small figure through the swirling white curtain. His initial instinct was to dismiss it as a shadow, a trick of light playing against the concrete pillars. But something, perhaps that heightened awareness born from tragedy, made him look twice. Ella sat perfectly still, almost blending into the gray concrete behind her. The security camera would later show she had been there for nearly 4 hours, watching people come and go, never making a sound, never asking for help. The timestamp on the footage would haunt Jason. 2:47 p.m. to 6:38 p.m., a 3-year-old alone in freezing temperatures, waiting with a patience no child should possess. "Hey there," Jason called softly, approaching with measured steps. His training told him to radio for backup first, but something in her posture, that terrible stillness, made him afraid she might disappear if he looked away. He kept his movements slow, deliberate, the way he'd been taught to approach traumatized victims. "I'm Officer Jason. Are you lost?" Ella's eyes met his, and in that moment, something shifted in the universe. Later, he would recognize it as the instant his life changed course. But right then, all he could focus on was the wisdom and weariness in those dark eyes. Her response came in a voice barely above a whisper. "My mummy doesn't want me anymore. She said someone good will find me." The words hit Jason like physical blows. Each one carried memories of Sarah. Her laugh, her trust, her absolute belief that her daddy could fix anything. He fought to maintain his professional composure as he knelt beside Ella, noting the details that would fill his report. Approximate age 3 to 4 years, dark hair, olive complexion, wearing a pink jacket, worn and damaged, mismatched mittens, and a butterfly backpack. "Can you tell me your mummy's name?" he asked, already reaching for his radio to call it in. But Ella's next word stopped him cold. "They'll hurt her if I tell," she said, her small fingers clutching the silver locket at her neck. She said, "Wait here. Someone good will come." She said, "Look for the stars." She pointed up at his badge. The wind howled around them, driving snow into the parking structure in stinging sheets. Jason shrugged off his coat, wrapping it around her tiny shoulders. The fabric engulfed her, making her appear even smaller. His mind raced through protocols. Call it in, wait for backup, contact social services. But protocols seemed inadequate in the face of those solemn eyes and that terrible adult understanding. When he reached for his radio, Ella's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. "Please," she whispered. "They're watching." They heard her when people try to help. The security cameras would later show just how long Jason hesitated. Exactly 47 seconds of internal struggle between procedure and instinct. In those 47 seconds, Jason noticed details his official report would never capture. Ella's fingernails were clean despite her otherwise unkempt appearance, suggesting recent care. Her backpack, though worn, was packed with meticulous attention, and she watched the shadows with a level of awareness far beyond her years. "Okay," he finally said, making a decision that would later be questioned by everyone from his supervisor to the district attorney. "Let's get you somewhere warm first. Then we can figure this out together." He held out his hand, letting her choose whether to take it. Ella studied his face for a long moment, then reached for his hand with the gravity of someone signing a contract. As they walked toward his patrol car, Jason noticed a dark sedan at the far end of the parking lot, its engine running. When he turned to look again, it was gone, leaving only tire tracks in the fresh snow. The mall security cameras had been experiencing technical difficulties that afternoon. The footage from 2:47 p.m. to 6:38 p.m. would later show only static, except for one clear frame. A woman in a dark coat hurrying away, her face hidden, her shoulders shaking in what might have been sobs. "Attention all mall visitors," the announcer's voice echoed through the nearly empty corridors. "If you are the parent or guardian of a young girl found in the parking structure, please come to the information desk immediately." The message repeated every 15 minutes, each announcement seeming to make Ella shrink further into Jason's coat. They sat in the mall security office, where the heat was cranked up to combat the winter chill. Ella hadn't spoken since entering the building, but her eyes tracked every movement, every shadow. The security guard, Mike Thompson, scrolled through the day's footage, his frown deepening with each passing minute. "This is weird, Officer Daniels," Mike said, pointing to his screens. "We've got clear footage all day. Then nothing but static starting at 2:47 p.m. picks up again after 6:30 p.m. He tapped a few keys. And get this, same thing happened to the exterior cameras, all of them at exactly the same time. Jason watched the last clear frame before the static. A dark sedan pulling into the far corner of the lot. The image quality was too poor to make out the license plate, but something about the car nagged at his memory. "Can you back it up? Show me the car entering the lot." The footage revealed little. The sedan's windows were tinted, its license plate obscured by what looked like mud or snow. But as it turned into the lot, a brief flash of the driver was visible. A woman, her face partially hidden by a scarf, her hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. Ella, who had been pretending not to watch, suddenly stiffened. Jason caught the reaction but didn't press her. Instead, he asked Mike to save the footage and print still frames of the vehicle. Officer Daniels, a mall employee, appeared at the door, clutching a tablet. "We've checked with all the stores. No one remembers seeing the girl or the woman in the car today." She hesitated, glancing at Ella, but the janitor found this in the women's restroom near the east entrance. She handed over a crumpled piece of paper. The note was handwritten, the letters shaky but determined. "Asterisk, please help her. I have no choice. They'll kill us both if I don't do this. Look in the locket." Asterisk, the paper was cheap, the kind found in hotel rooms, but the ink showed signs of tears having fallen on it. Jason glanced at Ella's necklace, but didn't reach for it. Instead, he radioed in a request for Detective Sarah Martinez, his old partner from homicide. If anyone would understand the delicacy of the situation, it would be Sarah. The mall's cameras might have been compromised, but the surrounding businesses' surveillance systems were intact. Jason dispatched officers to canvass the area, collecting footage from the gas station across the street, the bank on the corner, and the convenience store next door. Within an hour, a pattern emerged. The dark sedan had circled the mall 3 times before parking. Traffic cameras caught it at various intersections throughout the day, always moving slowly, as if the driver was fighting an internal battle with each turn. Sarah arrived, her face flushed from the cold. She took in the scene, Ella, curled up in Jason's massive coat, the security footage to note, and her expression shifted from professional concern to something deeper. "What's your gut telling you?" she asked. Before he could answer, Ella spoke for the first time in hours. "The bad men made Mummy cry." Her voice was barely audible. "They said they'd hurt me if she didn't." She stopped abruptly, pressing her lips together. Sarah knelt beside her, keeping a careful distance. "What did they want your mummy to do, sweetheart?" But Ella had retreated back into silence, her small fingers working the clasp of her locket without opening it. The radio crackled. An officer at the gas station had found something. Footage of the same sedan from 2 days ago. The driver had emerged briefly. A woman in her early 30s, dark hair, moving with the stiffness of someone in pain. She'd bought gas, paid cash, and driven off, but not before glancing directly at the camera. The image was clear enough to run through facial recognition. "Jason!" Sarah's voice was tight. "You need to see this." The woman in the gas station footage. She matches a photo from a case file. Missing persons report from 6 months ago. Suspected victim of domestic violence. Name's Elena Rodriguez. She's a former prosecutor. The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a picture that made Jason's blood run cold. He looked at Ella, seeing now the resemblance to the woman in the footage. The same dark eyes, the same determined set to the jaw. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering tracks, erasing evidence, while somewhere in the city, a mother's desperate gamble played out in ways none of them yet understood. "Daniel's my office. Now." Captain Reynolds' voice cut through the bustling precinct. Jason glanced at Ella, now under Michelle's watchful care, before following his superior officer. The captain's office felt smaller than usual, crowded with representatives from Child Protective Services and 2 stern-faced detectives from Internal Affairs. The local news played silently on a wall-mounted TV, showing footage of the mall parking lot with the caption, "Child abandoned. Police investigation raises questions. What part of protocol did you not understand?" Reynolds began, his voice carefully controlled. "You find an abandoned child, you call it in immediately. Instead, you took it upon yourself to," he consulted a paper on his desk, "spend 47 minutes alone with the victim before reporting." "With all due respect, sir," Jason started, but was cut off by a sharp-suited woman from CPS. "Officer Daniels, given your personal history," she paused delicately, "do you really think you're the best person to handle this case?" The implied criticism hung in the air. One of the IA detectives cleared his throat. "We've reviewed your recent case files. A pattern of excessive involvement in child-related cases, extended hours beyond shift requirements, multiple instances of protocol deviation." "The girl was terrified," Jason defended. "She specifically mentioned people watching, threats to her mother's life. Following standard protocol could have." "Could have what?" Reynolds interrupted. "Could have prevented proper documentation. Could have compromised the chain of evidence. Could have exposed this department to liability." The news footage shifted to an interview with a child psychology expert discussing the trauma of abandonment. Below, the ticker tape announced that local women's rights groups were organizing protests against the mother's actions. "We'll be taking custody of the child," the CPS representative stated firmly. "Given the high-profile nature of this case and the potential criminal elements involved, she needs to be in a secure facility." Jason felt his professional mask slipping. "She's 3 years old, for God's sake. She needs care, not a facility." "What she needs," the woman countered, "is professional intervention, not an emotionally compromised officer playing hero." The meeting deteriorated from there. By the time Jason emerged, his hands were shaking with suppressed anger. In the bullpen, he found Michelle waiting with worried eyes. "They're here for her," she said softly. "CPS brought transport. But Jason, there's something you need to see first." She led him to a desk where Ella had been drawing. The picture showed stick figures. A woman in what looked like a hospital bed, surrounded by dark figures with angry faces. In the corner, a smaller figure watched from behind what appeared to be bars. "She won't let go of that locket," Michelle added. "When they tried to examine it for evidence, she became hysterical. First real emotion she's shown." Before Jason could respond, heavy footsteps approached. 2 CPS workers, flanked by uniformed officers, moved toward Ella with practiced efficiency. The girl's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. She didn't cry or scream. Instead, she went completely still, her eyes finding Jason with that too-old stare. "You promised," she whispered. "You said we'd figure it out together." The CPS workers were professional but firm, gathering Ella's few belongings. When one reached for the locket, however, she finally broke. "No!" she screamed, backing away. "Mummy said never. They'll hurt her more. The commotion drew attention from throughout the precinct. Officers paused in their work, watching uncomfortably as the scene unfolded. Someone had tipped off the media. Reporters were already gathering outside, their cameras visible through the precinct windows. "Wait." Jason stepped forward, but a hand on his shoulder stopped him. Detective Martinez stood there, her expression grave. "The gas station footage," she said quietly. "It's gone. System malfunction. Same with the bank cameras. Someone's cleaning up." The implications were chilling. This wasn't just about an abandoned child anymore. Something larger and darker lurked beneath the surface. Ella's quiet sobs echoed through the precinct as the CPS workers led her away. She didn't struggle, didn't try to run. Instead, she walked with the same terrible composure she'd shown in the parking lot, only her tears betraying her fear. As the doors closed behind them, Jason noticed something on Michelle's desk. A small piece of paper that had fallen from Ella's pocket. On it, in careful childish writing, was an address followed by the words, "Mommy said only show the Star Man." Outside, the media circus was in full swing. Local stations led with speculation about parental negligence and system failures. Social media erupted with competing narratives, condemning the mother, criticizing the police, demanding justice without understanding what that meant. And somewhere in the city, a dark sedan continued to circle, its driver watching, waiting, while time ran out for a desperate mother and her impossible choice. As we delve deeper into this heart-wrenching story of love, sacrifice, and justice, we deeply appreciate your support. If this tale of a mother's desperate choice and a police officer's unwavering dedication has touched your heart, please take a moment to hit that like button. Your engagement helps spread these important stories to others who might need to hear them. The address led Jason to the city's forgotten outskirts, where abandoned factories cast long shadows over crumbling neighborhoods. The house stood apart from its neighbors, a Victorian relic with peeling paint and a distinctive feature that made his heart skip. Double doors painted a faded cobalt blue. "We should wait for backup," Detective Martinez said, but her hand was already on her weapon. The snow had erased any recent tracks, but the front walk had been shoveled at some point, creating walls of packed ice on either side. The blue doors were unlocked. Inside, the house told a story of hasty departure, or something worse. A coffee cup sat on the kitchen counter, lipstick stained and half full, a thin layer of mold floating on the surface. The table was set for breakfast, 2 plates, one with Cheerios gone soggy in contaminated milk. A child's drawing was magnet to the refrigerator. A woman with long dark hair smiling, holding hands with a smaller figure. Mummy and Ella written in wobbly letters. "Jason," Sarah called from the living room. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, undecorated except for a single ornament, a silver star identical to a police badge. Beneath it, wrapped presents gathered dust, each tagged for Ella in the same careful handwriting as the note from the mall. The house felt wrong in a way that made the hair on Jason's neck stand up. Everything was staged too perfectly, like a movie set designed to tell a specific story. But underneath the staged domesticity, he noticed other details. Scratch marks on the door frames, a baseball bat hidden behind the couch, every window locked but with the curtains arranged for quick glances outside. "This was a safe house," Sarah said quietly, examining the multiple locks on the front door. "Look at the security setup. Whoever lived here was hiding from someone." The upstairs bedrooms revealed more. Ella's room was painted pale yellow, decorated with butterfly stickers and glow-in-the-dark stars, but the bed was pushed against the wall, giving clear sight lines to both the door and window. The closet had been modified, a small hideaway space carved into the back wall, just big enough for a child to curl up in. The master bedroom was spartanly furnished, but the nightstand drawer contained a burner phone and a notebook filled with what appeared to be coded entries, dates, times, and strings of numbers that meant nothing to Jason yet. "Over here," Sarah called from the hallway. She stood before what appeared to be a solid wall, but her trained eye had caught something. "There's a draft." Together, They found the hidden catch, a recessed panel that swung open to reveal a narrow staircase. The hidden room above smelled of fear and desperation. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings, photographs, and handwritten notes connected by red string. A corkboard dominated one wall, centered on a photograph of a distinguished-looking man in a judge's robes. Judge Michael Blackwood. Sarah read from a caption. Isn't he? Yeah. Jason's voice was grim. Head of the Family Court Division, the one who's been making headlines for his tough stance on domestic violence cases. The evidence wall told a damning story. Photographs showed the judge at private meetings with known criminals. Documents detailed suspicious financial transactions. Court records showed a pattern of decisions that consistently favored certain defendants, wealthy ones, connected ones. But it was the other photographs that made Jason's blood run cold. Women and children, dozens of them, their faces marked with crosses. Missing persons reports that had been quietly closed. Cases that had been dismissed despite overwhelming evidence. She was building a case, Sarah whispered. Elena Rodriguez. She was a prosecutor. She must have stumbled onto something big. A laptop sat on a small desk, its screen dark. When they powered it up, it requested a password, but taped to the bottom was a post-it note with a single word, butterfly, the same pattern as on Ella's backpack. Before they could investigate further, Sarah's phone buzzed. Her face went pale as she read the message. Jason? Judge Blackwood just signed an emergency order. Ella's being transferred to a private facility upstate. Transport leaves in an hour. The implications hit him like a physical blow. A private facility meant isolation, meant control, meant leverage over a mother who knew too much. As if on cue, a floorboard creaked downstairs. Both officers drew their weapons, but the house had gone silent again, too silent. When they checked, the blue door stood open, swaying slightly in the winter wind. Fresh footprints in the snow led to tire tracks, then disappeared into the gathering darkness. Someone else knew about the house. Someone had been watching, and somewhere in the city, a clock was ticking down on both mother and daughter. A flash of silver caught Jason's eye as they re-examined the hidden room. Behind a loose floorboard, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a stack of letters and a small digital recorder. The first letter, dated 3 months ago, was written in the same shaky hand as a mall note. My dearest Ella, asterisk if you're reading this, I hope you're with someone you can trust. The man with stars, like the ones we counted, find him. The truth is in the locket, but only open it when you're safe. Remember what Mummy taught you. Sometimes we have to be brave, even when we're scared. Asterisk. All my love. Mummy. Sarah examined the recorder, while Jason read through the remaining letters. Each one documented another piece of the conspiracy. Judges taking bribes, children disappearing into private facilities, families threatened into silence. Elena Rodriguez had been methodically gathering evidence, knowing she was running out of time. Jason, Sarah's voice was tense. You need to hear this. She pressed play on the recorder. They found me today. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Asterisk Judge Blackwood's men. They showed me pictures of Ella at preschool at the park. Said they'd make her disappear like the others if I didn't cooperate. There are more facilities, hidden ones. They're using the children as leverage, keeping parents silent. The whole system is corrupted. If you find this, please save my daughter. The evidence is... Asterisk the recording cut off abruptly with the sound of breaking glass. Further searching revealed a hidden compartment in the wall containing a USB drive and more photographs. These were different. Surveillance shots of parties where judges and criminals mingled freely, of money changing hands in courthouse corridors, of children being led into unmarked vans. Look at this. Sarah pointed to a figure in the background of one photo. That's Chief Judge Harrison, and there's Senator Wells. This goes higher than Blackwood. A newspaper clipping from 6 months ago caught Jason's eye. Local woman missing after domestic violence hearing. The article mentioned Elena Rodriguez briefly, A prosecutor who had failed to appear in court, assumed to have abandoned her position. The judge who dismissed her cases, Michael Blackwood. They couldn't just silence her, Jason realized. They erased her, made it look like she ran away, discredited her work. The sound of a car door slamming outside froze them both. Through the grimy window, they spotted two black SUVs parking across the street. Men in dark suits emerged, moving with the practiced efficiency of professionals. "We need to move," Sarah hissed, already gathering the evidence. "If they find us here..." A phone rang, making them both jump. It was Jason's cell, displaying an unknown number. His hand shook slightly as he answered. "Officer Daniels." A cultured voice spoke softly. "I believe you're trespassing. I suggest you leave immediately and forget what you found, for your own good, and for little Ella's." The line went dead as footsteps echoed on the porch below. They had minutes, maybe seconds. The locket. Jason suddenly remembered. Ella's locket. Elena said the truth was in it. Sarah was already moving toward the hidden staircase. "We'll figure it out later. Right now, we need to." The sound of splintering would cut her off. The blue doors had given way. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Sarah pushed Jason toward the back window as flashlight beams swept the lower floor. They made it onto the narrow ledge of the Victorian's ornate architecture, just as heavy footsteps reached the second floor. The evidence was secure in Sarah's backpack as they navigated the icy ledge. Below, more dark vehicles were arriving. Just before they reached the old oak tree that would be their escape route, Jason glanced back to the hidden room's window. A tall figure stood there, his distinguished face illuminated by a flashlight. Judge Blackwood himself had come to oversee the cleanup. As if sensing Jason's gaze, he turned, their eyes meeting through the glass. The judge's expression never changed as he raised his hand, revealing Elena's recorder. The message was clear. They could run, but the judge held the system, the connections, and most importantly, he had Ella. As they made their way through back alleys, snow beginning to cover their tracks, Jason's mind raced. The transport would leave in less than an hour. Ella would disappear into a private facility, another piece of leverage in a corrupt game. Unless they could stop it, unless they could find Elena, unless the truth in the locket was enough to bring down an empire built on innocence. The clock was ticking, and somewhere in the city, a silver locket held secrets worth killing for. Child abandonment or something sinister. The headline screamed across every local news channel. Within hours of their escape from the Blue Door House, the media circus had exploded into a frenzy of competing narratives. Channel 5 News played footage of Judge Blackwood outside the courthouse, his silver hair gleaming in the winter sun. "As someone who has dedicated his life to protecting children," he said, "I am deeply concerned about this case. This poor child's abandonment reflects a troubling pattern of parental negligence in our community." The morning shows featured experts debating Elena Rodriguez's actions. What kind of mother abandons her child in a parking lot? Demanded a perfectly co-family psychologist. If she was truly in danger, there are proper channels, legal procedures. Breaking news banners flashed across screens as protesters gathered outside the courthouse. Two distinct groups had formed. One condemning Elena as an unfit mother, carrying signs that read children need protection and support Judge Blackwood's reforms. The other, smaller group held pictures of missing women and children, demanding investigations into the private facility system. Social media erupted with hashtags. Hashtag Find Elena Rodriguez competed with hashtag Protect the Children. Local parenting groups shared Elena's photo, some calling her a monster, others suggesting a deeper conspiracy. The videos of Ella being led to the CPS transport van went viral, her small face hidden but her stillness speaking volumes. "This is getting out of hand," Sarah said, showing Jason her phone. A local blog had published his photo, questioning his mental fitness to serve given his tragic personal history. Comments speculated about his relationship with Elena, suggesting inappropriate motivations for his involvement. The mainstream coverage took a darker turn when someone leaked Elena's case files. Former prosecutors' hidden struggles dominated the afternoon news. They painted a picture of a troubled woman, missed court appearances, erratic behavior, paranoid accusations against respected officials. Sources close to the investigation, one reporter intoned gravely, suggest Rodriguez may have been suffering from delusions, potentially putting her daughter at risk. Judge Blackwood's emergency order placing the child in protective custody may have saved her from a dangerous situation. But in smaller circles, different stories emerged. Legal aid forums shared anonymous accounts of similar cases. Parents who lost custody after raising concerns about judicial corruption. Domestic violence survivors whispered about threatened children, about evidence that disappeared, about judges who always seemed to rule in favor of wealthy abusers. A retired court clerk posted cryptically, "Look at the pattern. Single parents who know too much. Children placed in private facilities. Cases sealed. Records vanished. This isn't just about one mother and child." The public's reaction split along predictable lines. The comfortable middle class, trusting in the system, saw only a troubled woman who endangered her child. But those who had faced the system's darker side recognized something familiar in Elena's desperate choice. Politicians seized the moment. "We need stricter oversight of child custody cases," announced a city council member at a hastily called press conference. Judge Blackwood's proposed reforms. "Turn it off," Jason growled as the councilman praised Blackwood's dedication to children's welfare. But Sarah shook her head. "Look at the background," she pointed to the screen. Behind the politician, partially visible, stood a man they recognized from the hidden room photos. One of Blackwood's enforcers, watching the performance with a satisfied smile. The media machine was working exactly as intended, Sarah realized. Every headline questioning Elena's mental health, every expert condemning her choices, every politician praising Blackwood. It all served to bury the truth under an avalanche of carefully crafted narrative. A young reporter from the Alternative Weekly had started asking different questions. Her article about the pattern of children disappearing into private facilities was scheduled to run tomorrow. But tonight, her apartment caught fire in a tragic accident. She survived, but her laptop and notes were destroyed. The message was clear. Control the story, control the truth. As evening fell, a new headline flashed, breaking. Child to be transferred to specialized facility. The report praised Judge Blackwood's swift action to ensure the child's safety and well-being. The transport would leave in 20 minutes. In his apartment, Jason watched the coverage with growing despair. His phone buzzed. Another reporter wanting comment on his obsession with the case. The wall of his reputation, his credibility, was being systematically demolished. Then came a text from an unknown number. The truth isn't just in the locket, it's in what everyone refuses to see. Count the stars, Officer Daniels, like you did with her in the snow. Outside, the media vans gathered like vultures, their lights cutting through the winter darkness, while somewhere in the city, a silver locket held secrets that could either save lives or destroy them. If only they could reach it in time. The women's shelter looked abandoned at 3 a.m., but a single light burned in Sister Margaret's office. The elderly nun's face showed no surprise when Jason and Sarah slipped in through the back door, only a deep, tired understanding. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said, pulling a thick file from beneath a loose floorboard. Elena stayed here 6 times in the past year, but she wasn't just seeking refuge. She was gathering evidence. The file revealed a pattern more extensive than they'd imagined. Elena had used her position as a prosecutor to track cases through the system, documenting how they disappeared into Judge Blackwood's court. Single parents who raised concerns about corruption suddenly faced custody battles. Children were placed in facilities for evaluation, only to vanish into a network of private institutions. "Look at these intake forms." Sarah spread papers across the desk. "Every facility is owned by shell companies, but follow the money." Her finger traced a complex web of transactions. They all lead back to Cornerstone Behavioral Health, whose board of directors includes Judge Blackwood's wife. Sister Margaret added her own observations. The women who came here, they all told similar stories. Their children used as leverage, evidence vanishing from court files, police reports altered. But Elena was different. She was building a case, documenting everything. Until they caught her, Jason said quietly. The nun's eyes filled with tears. She knew they were closing in. The night before she came here with Ella, she told me, sometimes the only way to protect someone is to let them go. I didn't understand then. A deeper search into Cornerstone Behavioral Health revealed disturbing finances. Millions flowed through the company, but the facilities themselves operated on minimal budgets. Children were transferred frequently between locations, making them difficult to track. These aren't just private facilities, Sarah realized. They're holding cells. As long as they have the children, they control the parents. The pattern extended beyond family court. Jason found cases where witnesses in major criminal trials suddenly faced custody battles. Their children were placed in Cornerstone facilities, and mysteriously, their testimony changed. Elena wasn't just uncovering corruption in family court, he said. She found their whole control mechanism. They're using children to manipulate the entire justice system. Sister Margaret produced one final piece of evidence, a video file on an encrypted drive. Elena left this with me, she said to give it to someone who'd know what to do with it. The footage showed Elena, recorded the night before she left Ella in the parking lot. Her face was bruised, but her voice steady. If you're watching this, I'm probably dead. The evidence is spread across 3 locations, the Blue House, the shelter, and she glanced over her shoulder. The third piece is with Ella. The locket isn't just jewelry, but they're watching her now. I had to get her somewhere safe first, somewhere they wouldn't expect, someone they couldn't corrupt. She leaned closer to the camera. They think they control everything because they control our children, but the weight of her words hung in the air. She'd chosen him specifically. A cop who'd lost a child, who couldn't be threatened with a child's safety because he'd already endured the worst. Sarah's phone buzzed with an alert from her police database search. Jason, look at this. Before Elena was a prosecutor, she worked in digital forensics. And the company she worked for? They designed security systems for private facilities. The pieces started falling into place. Elena hadn't just been gathering evidence. She'd been planning an elaborate trap. The scattered evidence, the strategic placement of Ella, the timing of it all. She knew they'd send Blackwood's men to the Blue House, Jason said. Knew they'd try to clean up the evidence. But what if that's exactly what she wanted? Sister Margaret nodded slowly. The night before she disappeared, Elena said something strange. She said, sometimes you have to let them think they've won before you can show everyone the truth. A search of Elena's employment records revealed her specialty, hidden surveillance systems, the kind that could be built into the walls of a house, activated by specific triggers. The Blue House, Sarah whispered. When Blackwood showed up himself, she wanted him to show his hand. Jason remembered the judge's satisfied smile as he held up Elena's recorder. But what if that hadn't been the real evidence? What if Elena, with her background in surveillance, had turned the entire house into a witness? Sister Margaret handed them one final envelope. Inside was a key and an address on the outskirts of town. Elena said if anything happened to her, this would explain everything. But she was clear. It can only be open after they think they've won. Dawn was breaking as they left the shelter, the winter sun casting long shadows across the snow. In less than 12 hours, Ella would be transferred to a Cornerstone facility. Once she disappeared into that system, they'd lose any leverage they had. But Elena had planned for this, too. The scared mother leaving her child in a parking lot wasn't the whole story. She was a prosecutor, a digital forensics expert, a woman who understood that sometimes you had to sacrifice your queen to win the game. Jason's phone buzzed with another alert. Judge Blackwood had called a press conference for noon, no doubt to announce the successful cleanup of Elena's paranoid delusions and praise the system's swift action to protect an endangered child. He thinks he's won, Sarah said quietly. Good, Jason replied, thinking of Elena's words, because that's exactly what she was waiting for. The key in his pocket felt heavy with promise. But first, they had to reach Ella's locket before she disappeared into the system that had already swallowed so many others. The clock was ticking, and somewhere in the city, a mother's final gambit waited to be revealed. The temporary care facility was painted in cheerful colors that couldn't quite mask its institutional nature. Jason found Ella sitting by a window, methodically arranging a set of plastic stars into patterns he immediately recognized. The Big Dipper, he said softly, sitting beside her, just like we found in the parking lot. Ella didn't look up, but her hand stilled. Mummy says stars help us find our way home. Her voice was barely a whisper. She taught me to count them when I'm scared. The watching social worker shifted uncomfortably, but Jason ignored her. Instead, he pulled out a small box of star stickers he'd bought on the way. Want to make our own consolations? For the first time, Ella's composure cracked slightly. Her small fingers trembled as she reached for the stickers. Together, they began creating patterns on the window, each star placed with deliberate care. This one's Cassiopeia, Jason explained, thinking of nights with Sarah when the stars were their only comfort. She was a queen who loved her daughter so much, they put her in the sky forever. Like my mummy, Ella's question pierced his heart. Yes, sweetheart, he said softly. Exactly like your mummy. As they worked, Ella slowly began to talk. Not about the important things, she was too careful for that, but about small memories. How her mother taught her to make butterfly shadows on the wall, their secret code for danger. Counting backward from 10 in Spanish. The songs they sang when the bad men were nearby. Did you know, Ella said suddenly, placing a star with precise care, that butterflies remember where they're born? Mummy said they always find their way home, no matter how far they go. Jason caught Sarah's eye across the room, the butterfly backpack, the laptop password. Elena had been leaving them breadcrumbs all along. The social worker checked her watch. Officer Daniels, visiting hours are nearly over. And remember, once the transfer is approved. I know. Jason fought to keep his voice steady. No more visits. Ella's hand found his, small fingers intertwining with an intensity that broke his heart. Will you count stars with me one more time, please? They counted together, Ella's voice growing softer with each number. At 3, she pressed something into his palm, a tiny origami butterfly folded from a gum wrapper. Mummy says butterflies carry messages, she whispered, but only people who love you can read them. After Jason left, he carefully unfolded the butterfly. Inside, in wobbly children's writing, the locket opens at midnight when the stars align. That night, unable to sleep, Jason found himself pulling out Sarah's old photo albums. His daughter smiled up at him from every page. Forever 3 years old, forever just out of reach. I'm sorry, baby girl, he whispered, touching the images. I couldn't save you, but maybe I can save her. His phone buzzed. Sarah, sending security footage from the care facility. Ella in her room, carefully arranging her few possessions. The locket caught the light as she moved, and for a split second, the image cleared enough to see its face. Jason. Sarah's text read, asterisk look at the pattern engraved on the locket. It's not just decoration. Asterisk. He zoomed in and his breath caught. Tiny stars, arranged in a familiar pattern. The same constellation Ella had recreated on the window. The same pattern they'd found in the parking lot snow. Another message from Sarah. Asterisk Elena's employment record shows she worked on a specific type of time-lock security system. The kind that can only be activated when certain conditions align. Asterisk. The pieces clicked together. Elena hadn't just left evidence. She created a puzzle that only the right person could solve. Someone who would understand stars, who would recognize patterns, who would know what it meant to lose everything. She'd chosen him long before she left Ella in that parking lot. His phone rang, the care facility. His heart stopped until he heard Sister Margaret's voice. She'd pulled some strings, gotten a job as a night counselor. "The transfer papers came through," she said without preamble. "They're moving her tomorrow at dawn. But Jason, she's been drawing something all evening. The same pattern over and over." "Stars," he said softly. "Yes," Sister Margaret confirmed. "And she keeps asking what time it is. Says she has to stay awake until midnight. Says that's when the stars align." Jason looked at his watch. In 13 minutes, whatever Elena had hidden in that locket would become accessible. But Ella was under constant surveillance. The locket was regularly checked by security, unless the winter constellations, Jason realized, they're only visible at midnight this time of year. Elena knew that. Knew they'd be watching during the day. He was already moving. Sarah's text confirming she was en route to the facility. They had one chance. If they were wrong, if they misunderstood any part of Elena's puzzle, Ella would disappear into the system forever. But as he drove through the snowy streets, Jason felt a certainty he hadn't experienced since losing Sarah. Elena had chosen him for a reason. She'd recognized in him something he'd forgotten. That love, even broken love, even lost love, could still light the way home. Ella was waiting, counting stars and keeping secrets. And somewhere in the city, a mother's final message waited to be heard, wrapped in silver and starlight, protected by a love strong enough to let go. The clock struck 11:55, and the winter stars burned cold and bright above the city. The threats began at midnight. First, a video sent to Jason's phone. Footage of him and Sarah breaking into the Blue House, time-stamped and damning. Then crime scene photos from his daughter's accident with a chilling caption, asterisk how history repeats itself. How many children will you fail to save? Asterisk. Judge Blackwood's press conference had been a masterpiece of manipulation. Standing before a forest of microphones, his distinguished face grave with concern, he painted a chilling picture of Elena Rodriguez, a troubled woman, sadly delusional, who endangered her child with paranoid fantasies about institutional conspiracy. "Thanks to our swift action," he declared, "her daughter will receive the specialized care she needs." The media devoured it. Headlines screamed, "Mentally unstable mother's conspiracy claims debunked." Photos of Elena from security footage, looking haunted and disheveled, were splashed across every screen. Sarah's apartment was broken into, her case files scattered. Nothing taken, just a warning. At the precinct, Internal Affairs launched a routine review of every case Jason had handled in the past year. "They're squeezing from all sides," Sarah said, showing him her suspension notice. "My confidential informants are going silent. Evidence is disappearing from lockup. They're not just covering their tracks. They're erasing everything." The pressure mounted hour by hour. Jason's ex-wife received photos of him with Ella, accompanied by insinuating questions about his mental state. His therapist was subpoenaed for records about his obsessive behavior following Sarah's death. Sister Margaret called in tears. The shelter's funding had been suddenly cut, citing administrative irregularities. Families were being turned away, their files mysteriously lost. "It's not just about Elena anymore," she whispered. "They're sending a message to everyone. Stay silent or lose everything." The alternative weekly reporter who'd asked questions was fired for ethical violations. The court clerk who'd posted about patterns in custody cases had a sudden heart attack, though he'd never had cardiac issues before. Even the weather seemed to conspire against them. The worst winter storm in decades bore down on the city, threatening to close roads, ground flights, trap them all in place. Jason's phone rang constantly. Reporters seeking comment on his inappropriate fixation with the case, anonymous callers breathing threats, occasional clicks suggesting wiretaps. "Look at this," Sarah said, spreading surveillance photos across his desk. They showed Jason at the care facility, at the Blue House, at the shelter. "They've been watching us from the start. Everything we've done has played into their hands." The transport order for Ella had been moved up, no longer dawn, but within hours. The paperwork cited urgent safety concerns and risk of interference from unstable elements. Captain Reynolds called Jason into his office, his face heavy with regret. "They're offering you a deal," he said quietly. "Resign quietly. Admit to emotional instability affecting your judgment, and this all goes away. Fight it, and—" He pushed forward a thick folder of manufactured evidence. Jason's hands shook as he read. They'd fabricated years of concerning behavior, twisted every child-related case he'd handled into evidence of obsession. His grief over Sarah had been rewritten as dangerous instability. "You're a good cop, Jason," Reynolds said softly, "but you can't fight the whole system. Sometimes the only way to survive is to step back." But survival wasn't enough anymore. Not with Ella's trust in his hands. Not with Elena's sacrifice hanging in the balance. His phone buzzed again. Sister Margaret. "They're here," she whispered. Men in suits, asking questions about Elena's time here. "They have badges, but—" "Don't let them in," Jason ordered. "Whatever happens, protect those records." Sarah burst into the office, her face pale. The transport team just arrived at the care facility. They're not waiting for morning. They're taking her now. Outside, the storm intensified, snow falling so thick it turned streetlights into ghostly halos. Perfect weather for making someone disappear. Jason's desk phone lit up, Judge Blackwood himself. His cultured voice dripped with false concern. "Officer Daniels, I understand you're attached to this case. Losing a child leaves wounds that never quite heal. But ask yourself, are you protecting Ella or projecting your own loss? Are you seeing conspiracy where there's only tragedy?" The judge's words struck too close to home. For a moment, Jason wavered. What if they were right? What if grief had twisted his judgment, made him see patterns that weren't there? Then he remembered Ella's eyes, too old in her young face. Remembered Elena's careful planning, her desperate courage. Remembered the weight of that silver locket, heavy with untold truth. His phone chimed one final time. A message from an unknown number. Asterisk the stars align at midnight, but only if you're watching the right sky. Count backward from 10. Officer Daniels, like she taught her, asterisk. Somewhere in the howling storm, a transport van waited to take Ella away. Somewhere in the city, Elena's final message waited to be heard. And somewhere between grief and justice, between loss and redemption, Jason had to make a choice. The clock showed 11:45 p.m. 15 minutes until midnight, until the stars aligned, until whatever truth Elena had hidden would finally come to light. If they could reach it in time, if they could survive what was coming, if they weren't already too late. The storm raged on, and in its fury, Jason heard echoes of every parent who'd ever fought to protect their child, every voice silenced by power, every truth buried beneath layers of carefully constructed lies. The pressure was mounting, but so was their resolve. Sometimes the only way forward is through the heart of the storm. 11:50 p.m. The care facility loomed dark against the storm-ravaged sky. Jason and Sarah crouched in the service entrance, watching the transport team through snow-streaked windows. 6 men, supposedly CPS workers, but their movements betrayed military training. "Look at their shoes," Sarah whispered. "Same ones from the Blue House." A small figure appeared in an upstairs window. Ella, still wearing her locket, carefully arranging something by the glass. Even from this distance, Jason could make out the patterned stars, placed with deliberate precision. 11:53 p.m. Sister Margaret's voice crackled through their earpieces. "They're heading up to her room, but you need to see this." She transmitted a photo from Elena's shelter file, a diagram hidden within a child's drawing. Star patterns, timestamps, and a sequence of numbers. "It's not just a locket," Sarah realized, studying the diagram. "It's a key. Elena designed security systems, remember? The kind activated by specific sequences." 11:55 p.m. The facility's lights flickered as the storm intensified. through the swirling snow. Jason caught movement on the upper floor. The transport team was gathering outside Ella's room. Then his phone lit up with an incoming file. Security footage from the Blue House recorded the day Judge Blackwood arrived. The judge's smug smile as he held up Elena's recorder, but in the background, almost invisible, a small red light blinking in sequence with the stars. Elena didn't just leave evidence, Jason breathed. She left a key to unlock it, a key only Ella would know how to use. 11:57 p.m., Sarah's laptop pinged. The hidden surveillance system in the Blue House had activated, triggered by the same pattern Ella was creating upstairs. Footage began streaming. Hundreds of hours of judges, lawyers, and criminals, all carefully time-stamped and archived. She built a parallel system, Sarah said. Everything they did, every meeting, every threat, she recorded it all. But she knew they'd find any normal surveillance setup. 11:58 p.m. The transport team breached Ella's room. But in that moment, as midnight approached, something extraordinary happened. Every screen in the facility lit up simultaneously. Every computer, every security monitor, every digital display. And on each one, Elena Rodriguez appeared, very much alive. "If you're seeing this," she began, "it means they've done exactly what I predicted. Hello, Judge Blackwood. I see you've met my daughter." The judge's voice roared through the building. "Shut it down. Shut everything down." But Elena had planned for this, too. The recording continued, broadcasting simultaneously across the city, in police stations, newsrooms, courthouses, everywhere with a digital screen. "For 2 years, I investigated corruption in our family courts." Elena's voice rang out, steady and resolute. "I discovered something horrifying. A network of judges, politicians, and private facilities using children as leverage. They threatened parents into silence, manipulated testimony, made families disappear." Security footage began playing alongside Elena's testimony. Judge Blackwood in his chambers, accepting bribes. Children being transferred between facilities in the dead of night. Parents signing away rights under explicit threats. "I knew they'd kill me if I came forward, knew they'd destroy any evidence I collected. So I created something they couldn't destroy, a distributed system, activated only when specific conditions aligned. Stars in the sky, patterns only my daughter would recognize. A sequence we practiced every night." 11:59 p.m. The transport team reached for Ella, but froze as Elena's next words rang out. "Judge Blackwood, you thought you were so clever, cleaning up evidence, silencing witnesses, using my daughter as leverage. But every time you moved against me, you added to my case. Every threat, every bribe, every phone call, recorded, all archived, all waiting for this moment." The footage shifted to recent days. The judge ordering Ella's transfer, the cleanup team at the Blue House, the threats against Jason and Sarah. A perfect chronicle of corruption in action. Midnight struck. Throughout the city, phones buzzed with incoming files. Email servers overloaded as evidence flooded out. Elena had built a digital dead man switch, triggered by the very actions meant to silence her. And now, Elena's voice held steel beneath its softness. "It's all in the open. Every case you corrupted, every family you destroyed, every dollar you took. You can't make it disappear this time." In Ella's room, the silver locket clicked open, revealing not photos, but a tiny data drive. The final piece of Elena's puzzle, unlocked by starlight and a child's unwavering faith. Jason and Sarah burst into the room as the transport team's radios exploded with panic. Judge Blackwood was being arrested on live television. FBI teams were raiding Cornerstone facilities across the state. The carefully constructed empire of corruption was crumbling in real time. Ella stood by the window, surrounded by her paper stars, watching the chaos with those two old eyes. When she saw Jason, she smiled for the first time since the parking lot. "Mommy said the stars would help the good people find her," she said softly. She said, Sometimes you have to be lost before you can be found. Outside, the storm began to ease. Dawn was still hours away, but already the city was awakening to a transformed reality. Elena Rodriguez had sacrificed everything to expose the truth, trusting in the stars, a grieving officer, and a little girl's ability to remember patterns in the dark. The locket lay open on Ella's bed, its work done, its secrets finally revealed. But the real revelation was in the way Ella reached for Jason's hand, in the trust that had led them both through the longest night of their lives. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a locket opening under starlight and the courage of those who refuse to let the darkness win. The facility erupted into chaos as Judge Blackwood's voice thundered through the emergency system. Lock down the building. No one leaves with that child. But Elena's digital assault had compromised their control. Security doors opened and closed randomly. Cameras switched between feeds, and through it all, her testimony continued to broadcast, impossible to silence. The transport team, revealing their true nature, drew weapons. "The girl comes with us," their leader ordered, "or this ends badly for everyone." Jason positioned himself between them and Ella, feeling her small hand grip the back of his coat. Sarah flanked them, her own weapon ready. Outside, sirens wailed as local police responded to the facility's automated distress signals. "It's over," Jason said quietly. "Elena's evidence is everywhere. You can't make this disappear." "You think this ends with Blackwood?" The leader laughed, a harsh sound. "He's just one piece. The system is bigger than you know. How many children do we still have? How many parents will stay silent to protect them?" Through the facility's compromised speakers, Elena's voice provided a chilling answer. "Every facility, every transfer record, every hidden account, I found them all. Your entire network is exposed. Right now, federal agents are moving on 17 locations." The leader's radio crackled with confirmation. Facilities across the state reporting federal raids. His face contorted with rage as he raised his weapon. "Then this little bitch dies like her mother." Several things happened at once. Ella, with the preternatural calm she'd shown since the parking lot, began counting backward in Spanish. 10, 9, 8. Sarah dove for the light switch, plunging the room into darkness broken only by muzzle flashes and the storm's lightning. And through the chaos, Sister Margaret's voice came through their earpieces. "Elena's alive. We have her. The evacuation worked. Repeat, Elena is alive and safe." The revelation staggered the gunman just long enough. Jason grabbed Ella as Sarah laid down cover fire. They crashed through the door into the hallway, where facility staff and legitimate CPS workers were evacuating children from other rooms. 7, 6. Ella continued counting, her voice steady despite their desperate flight. The gunman pursued, but Elena's system worked against them. Security doors slammed shut randomly, trapping them in sections of the building. Emergency lights strobed, disorienting and separating their forces. They reached the main lobby, just as federal agents breached the entrance. The leader of their unit was familiar, Agent Chun, who'd worked with Elena on previous cases. 4, trace. Ella's count was almost done. The remaining gunmen, trapped between agents and local police, made their final stand. Bullets shattered the lobby's glass walls, sending cascades of frost-covered shards onto the snow-covered ground. As Ella spoke the final number, every screen in the lobby flared to life. But this time it wasn't recorded testimony. It was a live feed from a secure location, showing Elena Rodriguez, very much alive, surrounded by federal protective custody agents. "Hello, my brave girl." Elena's voice broke with emotion. "You counted the stars perfectly." Ella's composure finally cracked. "Mommy," she cried, reaching toward the screen. "You said the stars would bring you back." The gunmen's resistance collapsed at the sight of Elena alive. Their entire operation had been predicated on using her apparent death as leverage. "Now," With their network exposed and their primary hostage alive, they had nothing left. But the leader had one final card to play. "You think this ends here?" he snarled. "Ask Officer Daniels about the night his daughter died. Ask him who was really driving the other car." Jason felt the world tilt. The accident that killed Sarah, it had been ruled a drunk driver, a random tragedy. But now, looking at the leader's face, he remembered something. The investigation file had vanished before the case could go to court. "You bastards," he whispered. "You killed my daughter to silence Elena, to stop her investigation. We sent a message." The leader smiled through bloody teeth as federal agents cuffed him. "She didn't listen. Just like you didn't listen. Some people have to learn the hard way." Jason's gun hand shook with rage. Every fiber of his being screamed for vengeance. But then he felt Ella's small hand slip into his. "The stars see everything," she said solemnly, repeating words Elena must have taught her. "Even in the dark, even when we're afraid." Through the facility's broken windows, the storm had finally cleared. Stars glittered in the winter sky. The same stars that had guided them here, that had protected Elena's evidence, that had kept the little girl's faith alive through the longest night. On the screens, Elena watched their confrontation with tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Jason," she said softly. "I chose you because I saw your pain, your loss. I knew you'd understand what it means to risk everything for justice." The federal agents led the captured gunman away. Local police secured the facility, reuniting frightened children with their parents. And through it all, Ella kept hold of Jason's hand, anchoring him in the present, reminding him that even in darkness, light finds a way. The night's confrontation had exposed more than just corruption. It had revealed the terrible cost of justice, the weight of sacrifice, and the courage of those who refused to let evil triumph. Dawn was breaking over the city as emergency vehicles' lights painted the snow in red and blue. The confrontation was over, but its revelations would echo for years to come. Sometimes the greatest battles aren't won with bullets, but with truth. And sometimes the deepest wounds can only heal when justice finally finds its way home. The aftermath of the facility raid brought a new kind of chaos. As federal agents secured the building and processed arrests, reports flooded in from across the city. Judge Blackwood had escaped custody during transport. 3 other judges implicated in Elena's evidence had vanished. And most disturbing, a coordinated cyber attack was attempting to erase the distributed evidence. "They're burning everything," Sarah reported, monitoring the digital assault, "trying to corrupt the files before they can be verified. We need to get Elena's original drive somewhere secure." But securing evidence became secondary when Jason's phone rang. Sister Margaret, her voice tight with panic. "They found us." Blackwood knew about the house. "Elena, they took her. Left a message. Bring the drives and the girl to Adams Bridge. 1 hour." The choice was impossible. Elena's life against the evidence that could free hundreds of children. Justice against mercy. Truth against love. Ella, who had been quiet since seeing her mother on screen, suddenly spoke. "The stars aren't finished yet." She opened her locket, revealing not just the data drive, but a tiny screen displaying scrolling numbers. Mummy said wait for the whole pattern. Snow began falling again as they raced through the city streets. The bridge loomed ahead, its steel arch disappearing into swirling white. Blackwood's men had chosen well. Isolated, multiple escape routes, and in this weather, no witnesses. They found Elena kneeling in the snow, hands bound, Judge Blackwood himself holding a gun to her head. His distinguished facade had cracked, revealing the desperate man beneath. "The drives," he demanded. "All of them, or she dies like we should have killed her months ago." Jason stepped forward, keeping Ella behind him. "It's over, Judge. The evidence is already out there." "Out there isn't proof." Blackwood's voice rose hysterically. "Corrupted files, unverified claims. It all goes away without the originals. I still have friends. Influence. Give me the drives, and this all becomes another conspiracy theory." Elena caught Jason's eye, making a subtle gesture, the same countdown pattern Ella used with her stars. Understanding flickered between them. Diaz, Ella whispered behind him, starting the count. Elena spoke, her voice carrying over the wind. You never understood, Michael. The evidence was never just in the drives. It was in every parent you threatened, every child you used, every life you destroyed. I just had to show them they weren't alone. Nueve, ocho. Blackwood's grip on his gun tightened. Touching, but sentiment doesn't hold up in court. The drives now. Siete, seis. Sarah had disappeared into the swirling snow, moving to flank their position. Through their earpieces, they could hear federal agents approaching, but too slowly through the storm. Cinco, cuatro. Last chance, Blackwood called out. The drives, or... The rest was lost as every phone on the bridge suddenly blazed to life. Elena's final failsafe activated, broadcasting not just the screens now, but to every device with a signal. Her voice multiplied across thousands of speakers, echoed under the bridge. Tres, dos. The evidence wasn't just files anymore. It was voices, hundreds of them, parents, children, witnesses, all telling their stories. A chorus of testimony too powerful to ignore, too numerous to silence. Uno. Blackwood, realizing too late the true nature of Elena's plan, swung his gun toward Ella. But Elena was already moving, having worked her bonds loose during the countdown. She threw herself at him as Sarah emerged from the snow, weapon raised. The bridge erupted in chaos. Blackwood's remaining men engaged with arriving federal agents. Gunfire mixed with the howling wind. And through it all, the voices continued, a rising tide of truth that no amount of corruption could hold back. Jason grabbed Ella as Elena and Blackwood struggled at the bridge's edge. The judge, his madness finally complete, pulled them both toward the icy river below. The stars, Ella screamed. Mummy, the stars. Elena looked up at her daughter one last time, peace replacing fear on her face. As she and Blackwood went over the rail, she mouthed the words, asterisk, count them. My love, I'll always be there. Asterisk. Jason's desperate grab caught Elena's jacket. Sarah and two federal agents seized her arms, but Blackwood, refusing to be taken, kicked away from the bridge into the darkness below. They pulled Elena to safety as police boats searched the river. Blackwood's body would be found 3 days later, carried downstream by the current. In his pocket, they'd find a list of names, judges, politicians, business owners, all part of his corrupt network. His final, unintended confession. As emergency crews swarmed the bridge, Ella ran to her mother. Their reunion was witnessed by dozens of cameras, a moment of pure love that would become a symbol of the night justice finally prevailed. Elena held her daughter close, both of them illuminated by swirling red and blue lights. You remembered, she whispered. You counted every star. I knew you'd come back, Ella replied with the simple faith of a child who had never stopped believing. The crisis had passed, but its cost was etched in snow and blood on Adam's Bridge. Sometimes victory comes not from winning, but from refusing to let evil win. Sometimes the greatest courage is not in fighting, but in trusting that light will always find its way through darkness. As the storm began to clear, stars appeared between breaking clouds. The same stars that had guided them here, that had protected truth, that had kept hope alive on the longest night anyone could remember. And somewhere in the city, hundreds of children were going home, their parents' silence finally broken, their futures reclaimed from those who would use love as a weapon. As our story unfolds with such intensity and emotion, we pause for a moment to connect with you, our valued audience. If this tale of justice, love, and sacrifice has touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing these powerful stories that matter. In the warmth of a secure FBI safe house, Elena Rodriguez finally told her complete story, her voice steady despite the tears that occasionally escaped. It started 2 years ago, she began, holding Ella close on her lap. A routine custody case, but something felt wrong. The father had connections, money, a history of violence, yet somehow he kept winning every hearing. The mother was desperate, saying they'd threatened her child. I'd heard that before, but this time... She pulled out a worn leather journal, its pages filled with meticulous notes, dates, photographs. I started noticing patterns. Cases where wealthy abusers always won. Children placed in private facilities if parents complained. Evidence vanishing from court files. The evidence she gathered painted a chilling picture. Judge Blackwood had built his empire slowly, starting with small custody cases, gradually expanding to criminal matters. Children became his currency. Threats to keep witnesses silent, leverage to control testimonies. When I dug deeper, I found the facilities. Cornerstone was just the surface. They had places, special places for children whose parents knew too much. Elena's voice broke. They called them behavioral modification centers, but they were prisons. Children kept drugged, isolated, moved around so no one could track them. She showed them photographs smuggled from the facilities, empty-eyed children in sterile rooms, surveillance logs documenting treatments, financial records showing millions changing hands. I thought I was being careful, Elena continued, gathering evidence slowly, building a case. But they were watching. The night they came to my house, she shuddered. They showed me pictures of Ella at preschool at the park, said one phone call could make her disappear into the system. That's when Elena had started planning. Her background in digital security became her weapon. She built hidden systems, scattered evidence across secure locations, created triggers that only her daughter would recognize. The stars were our special thing, she smiled at Ella. Every night we'd count them, find patterns. I taught her that stars help lost people find their way home. When I had to leave her in that parking lot, her voice cracked. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I knew they were closing in. Knew they'd kill us both if I didn't act. I had to make them think they'd won. Had to give Ella a chance to reach someone they couldn't corrupt. She turned to Jason. I chose you because I'd seen your file. A cop who'd lost his child. They couldn't threaten you with what you'd already endured. But more than that, I saw how you handled cases involving children. Your compassion, your dedication. I knew you'd understand. The journal's final pages revealed the full scope of her plan. The parking lot wasn't random. She'd studied Jason's patrol patterns. The Blue House had been rigged with surveillance months in advance. Even her apparent death had been staged with agents who'd been building their own case. But Elena hugged her daughter tighter. My brave, brilliant girl. She carried the heaviest burden. Had to pretend not to know, had to wait, had to trust that the stars would guide her true. Ella looked up at her mother with those old soul eyes. I counted every night, she said. Even when I was scared, the stars never lied. Elena's testimony would eventually help convict 32 judges, dozens of facility administrators, and over 100 others involved in the corruption network. But the numbers couldn't capture the human cost. Years of separation, trauma inflicted on children, families torn apart by impossible choices. The hardest part wasn't risking my life, Elena concluded, her voice thick with emotion. It was knowing that even if we succeeded, even if we exposed everything, we couldn't undo what they'd done. Those children, those families, some wounds never fully heal. She showed them one final photograph. Ella as a baby, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storms to come. But we could stop it from happening to others. We could show people that fighting back is possible, that even in the darkest night, stars can guide us home. Outside the safe house, dawn painted the snow-covered city in gentle rose and gold. The worst of the storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed, not just by weather, but by truth finally brought to light. Elena Rodriguez had risked everything, her career, her freedom, her life, even her daughter's love, to expose a cancer eating at the heart of justice. Her story would be told for years to come, a testament to one mother's courage and the unbreakable bond between parent and child. But for now, she simply held her daughter, counting stars only they could see, while morning light washed away the shadows of their longest night. As Elena's evidence filtered through the judicial system, the extent of institutional failure became horrifyingly clear. The federal investigation revealed not just corruption, but a systematic dismantling of every safeguard meant to protect vulnerable children. The numbers were staggering. 347 children disappeared into private facilities, 89 custody cases manipulated through threats, $42 million in bribes through Cornerstone alone, 23 judges implicated across 3 states, and dozens of prosecutors and social workers silenced. But the statistics couldn't capture the human tragedy. In the following weeks, as families came forward, their stories painted a picture of institutional betrayal that shook the city's foundations. A mother who'd lost custody after reporting judicial corruption. I went to every authority, begged them to investigate. They called me paranoid unstable. Meanwhile, my son was drugged in their special facility for 2 years. A social worker who'd tried to raise alarms. Every time I filed a report, it vanished. My supervisor said I was seeing problems where none existed. Then they threatened my daughter's school placement. What could I do? The system's failure wasn't just corruption. It was indifference. People who could have helped chose to look away. Police departments ignored parent reports. Hospital staff dismissed suspicious injuries. School administrators returned children to abusive situations. Oversight committees rubber-stamped facility licenses. At a congressional hearing, a former Cornerstone employee testified, "We knew something was wrong. The children who arrived healthy became vacant-eyed within weeks. But the paperwork was always perfect. Every transfer authorized. Every treatment approved. The system protected itself." The city's Child Protective Services underwent a devastating audit. Files had been altered, reports buried, warnings ignored. Workers who tried to protect children found their careers destroyed, while those who played along received promotions. A veteran family court clerk broke down during her testimony. "I watched Judge Blackwood destroy families for 15 years. Everyone knew, but no one could prove it. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as they designed it." The media, which had initially portrayed Elena as unstable, now faced its own complicity. Reporters who dismissed abuse allegations as custody dispute tactics discovered they'd been manipulating public opinion on behalf of corrupt judges. Professional oversight boards that should have investigated complaints were found to be compromised. Even after the evidence became public, parts of the system fought to maintain control. Courts delayed hearings. Records mysteriously vanished. Witnesses faced sudden tax audits or licensing issues. A state senator who tried to investigate years earlier spoke bitterly. "The system doesn't fail. It protects power. Everything else, justice, truth, children's welfare, is sacrificed to maintain control." The hardest truth was how many people had suspected but chosen silence. Teachers who noticed withdrawn children, doctors who treated suspicious injuries, lawyers who saw pattern after pattern, all convinced themselves it wasn't their problem to solve. As one federal investigator concluded, this wasn't just criminal conspiracy, this was institutional cowardice. Everyone waited for someone else to be brave first. The system's failure had created perfect conditions for corruption. Overworked staff unable to investigate thoroughly. Complicated bureaucracy, hiding accountability. Whistleblower protections that existed only on paper. A culture of silence reinforced by fear. Elena's evidence exposed not just individual crimes, but a fundamental betrayal of trust. The very institutions meant to protect society's most vulnerable had become weapons against them. In the end, the system's greatest failure wasn't corruption. It was the death of hope. Hundreds of families had learned that justice was an illusion, that truth meant nothing against power, that love itself could become a weapon of control. But in exposing these failures, Elena had also shown a path forward. Sometimes the system could only be changed by those brave enough to risk everything, to stand alone against power, to believe that truth would eventually find its way into light. Every victory exacts its price, and the aftermath of Elena's exposure left no one unscathed. The personal toll manifested in quiet moments, in nightmares, in the spaces between triumph and trauma. For Jason, solving Sarah's death brought no peace. The knowledge that his daughter had been collateral damage in a larger conspiracy poisoned even his sweetest memories. At night, he'd wake gasping, two images merging in his dreams. Sarah's broken body and Ella in that parking lot, both victims of the same corrupt machine. "I thought finding the truth would help," he confessed to Sarah Martinez during a late-night stakeout. But knowing they killed her just to send a message, how do you live with that kind of knowledge? His career, despite the vindication, was effectively over. Other officers viewed him with a mixture of awe and discomfort. His presence reminded them of their own silences, their own moments of looking away. Even those who supported him struggled with the implications. How many other cases had they mishandled? How many signs had they missed? Elena faced her own battles. During her months in hiding, she'd had purpose, drive, a mission that consumed her. Now, watching Ella sleep, she battled crushing guilt over the trauma she'd inflicted on her own child. "She looks so peaceful," Elena whispered one night. "But then she'll wake up counting stars, checking exits, whispering that code we practiced. I taught my 3-year-old to be a soldier in a war she never should have known existed." The psychological evaluations were brutal. Ella showed signs of complex trauma. Elena struggled with severe PTSD. Jason's grief had evolved into deep-seated paranoia. Even Sarah Martinez reported symptoms of secondary trauma, and their relationship suffered. Elena's parents couldn't understand why she'd risked everything, including their granddaughter's safety. Jason's ex-wife, learning the truth about Sarah's death, blamed him for investigating cases that had put their daughter at risk. The Federal Protection Program offered safety, but imposed its own costs. New identities meant leaving behind friends, careers, entire lives. Ella would grow up looking over her shoulder, never fully trusting, always watching for signs of danger. Professional consequences mounted. Jason was quietly pushed toward early retirement. Elena's law license was suspended pending review. Sarah was passed over for promotion, labeled difficult. Sister Margaret's shelter lost critical funding. Even their victories felt hollow. Yes, they'd exposed corruption, but the system's deeper problems remained. New judges filled the vacant seats. New facilities opened under different names. Power adapted, shifted, found new shadows to hide in. The media attention brought its own trauma. Every interview forced them to relive the worst moments. Conspiracy theorists analyzed their every word. Internet trolls accused them of fabricating evidence for fame. Ella's artwork told its own story of cost. Dark figures lurking in corners. Stars that looked more like eyes watching. Houses with too many locks. Families separated by thick black lines. The psychiatric reports were clear. Healing would take years, if it came at all. Trust, once broken at such a fundamental level, might never fully recover. During a particularly difficult therapy session, Ella asked a question that haunted them all. "If bad people come back, will you have to leave me again?" The cost manifested in small ways. Jason couldn't drive past playgrounds. Elena checked her phone's encryption hourly. Ella refused to sleep without counting stars. Sarah kept a bug detector in her purse. Their victory had exposed corruption, but it had also exposed how vulnerable they all were. The system they'd fought against had marked them, changed them, left scars that no amount of justice could fully heal. Yet in their shared trauma, they found a different kind of strength. They understood each other in ways others couldn't. Their wounds became a bond, their paranoia a shared language, their hypervigilance a mutual protection. As Elena noted in her journal, *, maybe the real cost isn't what we lost fighting the darkness. Maybe it's knowing we can never go back to who we were before we knew it existed. Asterisk, the stars still guided them, but now they saw them differently, not just as lights in darkness, but as silent witnesses to both triumph and trauma, to the price of truth and the cost of courage. The revelation came on a quiet Sunday afternoon, 3 months after the trial. Elena's parents arrived at the safe house unannounced, carrying a heavy box of old photo albums and a burden of guilt even heavier. Maria and Carlos Rodriguez had been silent for too long, and their confession spilled out in a torrent of tears and broken English. They had known about Blackwood's corruption for years. Carlos, a courthouse janitor, had witnessed countless late-night meetings, had seen the evidence of bribery and coercion. Maria, working in one of Cornerstone's kitchens, had noticed the children's vacant stares, the mysterious transfers, the paperwork that never quite matched reality. When Elena first started investigating, they had recognized the signs but said nothing, hoping their silence would protect their daughter and granddaughter. The truth was more complex than simple fear. Blackwood's network had identified them early, recognizing the potential threat of working-class immigrants with access to both the courthouse and the facilities. The threats had been subtle at first: visa renewal issues, tax audits, suggestions about workplace safety violations. But they escalated when Elena began her investigation. Photos of Ella appeared in their mailbox. Their younger son's college scholarship was suddenly under review. The message was clear: stay silent or lose everything. Maria's hands trembled as she pulled out an old photograph of Elena as a child, bright-eyed and fearless, standing before her first court appearance in a mock trial competition. "We came to America for justice," she whispered. "But when justice became corrupt, we chose survival over truth. We failed our daughter by teaching her to fight while we ourselves were too afraid to stand." The box contained more than memories. Hidden beneath the photos were documents Carlos had secretly collected over years of cleaning judges' offices: meeting notes, bank statements, facility transfer orders. He had wanted to give them to Elena, but feared the consequences. Instead, he had hidden them, adding to the collection piece by piece, hoping someday they might matter. Their guilt had nearly broken them when Elena disappeared. They had watched Ella in that parking lot through the window of their car, wanting desperately to run to her, but knowing they had to maintain the fiction of ignorance. Every night, they had gazed at the same stars their granddaughter counted, praying for forgiveness they didn't feel they deserved. The truth about their involvement with federal agents emerged slowly. They had been feeding information through intermediaries for months, helping build the case while maintaining their cover. Their position as seemingly powerless immigrants had been their greatest asset. No one suspected the cleaning staff of gathering intelligence. Ella, listening from the doorway, suddenly ran to her grandparents. "You were counting stars too," she said with the simple wisdom of a child. "Just like Mummy taught me. Different stars, saying fight." Her forgiveness, offered without hesitation, broke something open in all of them. Elena's reaction moved through shock to understanding, to a deeper appreciation of her parents' sacrifice. They had carried their own burden of courage, fighting in their own way, choosing a path that cost them their peace but preserved their ability to help from the shadows. Their silence had not been cowardice but strategy, a different kind of battle in the same war. The documents they had gathered provided the final pieces of the puzzle, connecting offshore accounts, revealing the full scope of political protection, and identifying collaborators still embedded in the system. Their years of quiet observation had created a map of corruption that completed Elena's evidence. But the real revelation wasn't in the documents. It was in understanding how courage takes different forms, sometimes loud and defiant like Elena's stand, sometimes quiet and persistent like her parents' years of secret resistance. The stars they had all counted, though viewed from different positions, had guided them toward the same truth. As night fell, 3 generations sat together, sharing stories they had never dared tell before. Ella taught her grandparents the star-counting pattern Elena had created, while they shared the constellations they had known in their homeland. Their combined wisdom, old world and new, open defiance and quiet resistance, created a fuller picture of what it means to fight for justice. In the end, the grandparents' truth added another layer to their victory. It showed that even in the darkest systems, resistance takes many forms. Sometimes the quietest warriors are the most essential, and courage doesn't always announce itself with declarations. Sometimes it whispers in clean offices late at night, in carefully preserved documents, in the patient gathering of truth while waiting for the right moment to let it shine. The unraveling of Blackwood's empire revealed a conspiracy more vast and insidious than anyone had imagined. The federal investigation, armed with Elena's evidence and the grandparents' documents, exposed a network that reached into every level of power. Like pulling a single thread that unraveled an entire tapestry, each revelation led to deeper, darker discoveries. Corporate giants had funded the private facilities, using them to control whistleblowers and silence environmental activists. When employees threatened to expose toxic dumping or unsafe working conditions, their children would suddenly develop behavioral issues requiring specialized care. The threat was clear. Stay quiet or lose your children to the system. Political connections surfaced through financial records. Campaign contributions flowed through a maze of shell companies, all leading back to Cornerstone and its subsidiaries. Judges weren't just taking bribes. They were part of a sophisticated influence trading network. A favorable custody ruling here, a dismissed criminal case there, all building political capital that protected the entire operation. The technology infrastructure proved especially damning. Elena's expertise had uncovered a communication system built into the family court database. Cases could be flagged for special handling, records altered, evidence removed, all without leaving traces in official logs. The system had been designed specifically for corruption, disguised as administrative efficiency. International connections emerged as investigators followed money trails. Private facilities in 3 countries coordinated child transfers, making it nearly impossible for parents to locate or contact their children. Wealthy clients worldwide used the network to hide assets, launder money, and maintain control over troublesome family members. Law enforcement complicity ran deep. Several high-ranking officers had been paid to discredit abuse allegations, manipulate evidence, and intimidate witnesses. The same team that had engineered Sarah's accident had orchestrated dozens of similar incidents, eliminating threats while maintaining plausible deniability. Medical professionals were implicated through prescription records. Children in facilities received powerful medications, not for treatment, but for compliance. Doctors signed off on unnecessary prescriptions, falsified diagnoses, and ignored obvious signs of abuse. The pharmaceutical companies involved had turned massive profits while supplying drugs that kept children docile and controllable. The educational institutions played their part. Private schools accepted substantial donations in exchange for reporting behavioral concerns about targeted children. Public school administrators were pressured to modify records, creating paper trails that justified removing children from their homes. The educational system had become another weapon in the arsenal of control. Religious organizations were not exempt. Several prominent churches had received generous donations in exchange for providing character references for corrupt judges and discrediting accusations against powerful members. The moral authority of religious leaders was used to shame and silence victims while protecting perpetrators. Media manipulation emerged as a crucial component. Local news outlets had been pressured to bury stories, discredit whistleblowers, and promote narratives that served the conspiracy's interests. Journalists who tried to investigate found their careers suddenly derailed, their reputations mysteriously tarnished. The human cost became clearer as victims felt safe enough to speak. Families torn apart, careers destroyed, lives shattered, all to protect a system that turned children into commodities and justice into a tradable commodity. The conspiracy hadn't just corrupted institutions. It had poisoned the very concept of protection and care. Real estate holdings revealed another layer. Properties purchased through shell companies housed not just facilities, but evidence storage, meeting locations, and safe houses for enforcers. The conspiracy had built a physical infrastructure as comprehensive as its political one. Professional organizations that should have provided oversight were compromised. Licensing boards ignored complaints, ethical committees turned blind eyes, and regulatory agencies were staffed with collaborators. The system had been designed to protect itself, with layers of redundancy ensuring that even if one part was exposed, the rest could continue operating. The investigation scope expanded as more victims came forward. Families who had been silenced for years found the courage to speak, their stories adding depth and detail to the evidence. Each revelation brought new outrage, but also new determination to ensure that such a system could never rise again. In the end, the conspiracy's unraveling was not just a victory for justice, but a testament to the power of truth, the resilience of the human spirit, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The stars that had guided Elena, Ella, and their family through the darkest nights now shone as symbols of hope, reminders that even in the face of overwhelming corruption, light can still find its way through the darkness. Bar associations, medical boards, and accreditation agencies had been infiltrated at the highest levels. The very bodies meant to ensure professional ethics had become guardians of corruption. As the conspiracy unraveled, those involved began turning on each other. Judges offered testimony against politicians. Facility administrators implicated corporate executives. The network that had operated in shadows for decades collapsed in a cascade of betrayal and self-preservation. Elena's evidence, combined with a federal investigation, exposed not just individual crimes but a fundamental corruption of power itself. The conspiracy had succeeded not through overwhelming force, but through the slow erosion of resistance, the careful cultivation of complicity, and the systematic destruction of hope. The public revelation shook society's foundations. Trust in institutions plummeted. Demands for reform echoed through streets and legislatures. The exposure forced a national conversation about power, protection, and the true meaning of justice. Yet even as the conspiracy was exposed, new questions emerged. How many similar networks existed yet undiscovered? How deeply had corruption infiltrated other systems? The answers remained elusive, but one truth became clear. The light Elena had shined into darkness had illuminated not just a conspiracy, but the fragility of justice itself. As arrests continued and evidence mounted, society grappled with an uncomfortable reality. The system hadn't failed. It had been carefully designed to facilitate abuse while maintaining a facade of legitimacy. The conspiracy's exposure didn't just demand justice. It required a complete reimagining of how power and protection intersect in a just society. The exposure of Blackwood's conspiracy sparked a grassroots movement unlike anything the city had seen. What began as scattered protests evolved into a coordinated campaign for systemic reform, drawing together unlikely allies and challenging power structures. Parents whose children had been taken formed support groups that transformed into advocacy organizations. Domestic violence survivors, whistleblowers, and former facility staff united under a common banner. Justice is not negotiable. Their personal testimonies, once dismissed as paranoid conspiracies, now carried the weight of validated truth. Legal professionals responded with unprecedented solidarity. Young lawyers formed pro bono networks to represent families seeking reunification. Retired judges came forward with their own stories of pressure and coercion. Law schools established special clinics focused on investigating systemic corruption in family courts. The reforms began at the local level. Independent oversight committees were established, staffed by community members rather than political appointees. Surveillance systems were installed in judges' chambers and courthouse corridors. Every custody decision now required multiple levels of review and public documentation. Social workers and healthcare providers created new protocols for identifying and reporting institutional abuse. Anonymous reporting systems protected whistleblowers while ensuring their concerns reached multiple agencies simultaneously. No single person or department could bury a report. Technology played a crucial role in the movement's success. Elena's expertise inspired a network of ethical hackers who developed transparency tools for tracking judicial decisions, facility transfers, and financial transactions. Every court action became publicly traceable, with anomalies automatically flagged for review. The media landscape transformed as independent journalists formed collaborative investigation teams. They shared resources, protected sources, and published simultaneously across multiple platforms to prevent suppression. Local news outlets, shamed by their past compliance, established dedicated corruption investigation units. Education became a powerful vector for change. Schools implemented Know Your Rights programs for both children and parents. Teachers received specialized training in recognizing signs of institutional abuse. Student activist groups organized support networks for affected families. Religious communities underwent their own revolution. Progressive clergy members led congregations in examining their role in enabling corruption. Houses of worship became sanctuaries in a literal sense, offering protection and support to families fighting the system. Corporate accountability took center stage as activists targeted companies connected to private facilities. Shareholder initiatives demanded transparency. Consumer boycotts forced businesses to sever ties with corrupt institutions. Investment firms faced pressure to divest from companies profiting from child detention. The movement's most powerful weapon was story. Elena and Ella became symbols of resistance, but thousands of others stepped forward to share their experiences. These narratives, collected and curated through a digital archive, created an undeniable record of systemic abuse and the courage required to fight it. International attention brought unexpected allies. Human rights organizations provided resources and expertise. Foreign journalists investigated global connections. The local movement became part of a worldwide conversation about institutional corruption and child protection. Legislative change followed public pressure. New laws mandated facility transparency, limited private juvenile detention, and established strict oversight of family court judges. Financial disclosure requirements were strengthened, and whistleblower protections gained real teeth. The mental health community mobilized to support survivors. Trauma specialists developed programs specifically for families affected by institutional abuse. Support groups helped parents and children rebuild trust. The psychological impact of systemic corruption was finally acknowledged and addressed. Law enforcement culture shifted as new leadership prioritized accountability. Internal affairs departments were restructured with civilian oversight. Officers received specialized training in recognizing and reporting judicial corruption. The blue wall of silence began to crumble. Yet the movement's greatest achievement was harder to quantify. It restored hope to a community that had lost faith in justice. People learned they could fight back, that solidarity could overcome corruption, that truth could prevail against power. Each small victory strengthened the movement's resolve. When a corrupt judge was removed, when a family was reunited, when a whistleblower was protected instead of punished, these moments proved change was possible. Elena's prediction proved true. Exposing the conspiracy wasn't enough. Real change required sustained effort, constant vigilance, and the courage to keep fighting even after the headlines faded. The movement she inspired became a model for other communities, a template for turning outrage into action. As the justice movement grew, it attracted both powerful allies and determined enemies. Those who had profited from corruption fought back through legal challenges, media manipulation, and political pressure. But they faced a transformed community, united in purpose, and unwilling to return to shadows. The stars that had guided Elena and Ella through their darkest night now symbolized something larger. The countless points of light created when people stand together against darkness. Each story shared, each reform demanded, each small act of resistance added another star to that constellation of hope. The movement's message was clear. Justice isn't just a system. It's a commitment that must be renewed every day. And sometimes the greatest victories come not from changing laws, but from changing hearts and minds until the very idea of using children as pawns becomes unthinkable. 1 year after the conspiracy's exposure, The city gathered for a unique ceremony. The old courthouse, once a symbol of corruption, was being rededicated as the Elena Rodriguez Center for Family Justice. Snow fell softly as Ella, now 4, cut the ribbon with small, steady hands. The changes were more than symbolic. Every judge's office now featured transparent walls and public observation areas. Cameras recorded all proceedings, streaming to secure servers beyond any single person's control. The corrupt system's dismantling had been methodical and thorough. Judge Blackwood's body, found in the spring thaw, carried evidence implicating dozens more conspirators. Cornerstone's facilities were converted into genuine treatment centers, now run by nonprofit organizations. Seized assets funded rehabilitation programs for families. New oversight mechanisms ensured no single person could wield unchecked power. Elena's innovative safety protocols became national standards. Her surveillance system design protected both transparency and privacy, while her case-tracking software made manipulation virtually impossible. The STAR system she created, multiple, independent verification points, was being implemented in courts nationwide. The human resolution proved more complex, but equally profound. Families torn apart by corruption began healing processes that would take years, but showed promising signs. Children from facilities received specialized trauma support. Parents attended healing circles led by survivors. Communities developed support networks for affected families. Former facility staff who'd opposed abuse became valuable witnesses and advocates. Jason found an unexpected path forward. Rather than returning to regular police work, he established a training program teaching officers to recognize and resist institutional corruption. Sarah's death, while still painful, had become a powerful teaching tool about the cost of systemic failure. The Rodriguez grandparents emerged as quiet heroes, their years of careful documentation helping prosecute dozens of corrupt officials. Their story inspired other silent witnesses to come forward, proving that resistance takes many forms. Most importantly, Ella thrived. Though she still counted stars each night, it had become a celebration rather than a survival mechanism. Her trauma counselor reported remarkable progress, noting how she transformed her hypervigilance into keen observation skills and her coding abilities into creative expression. Elena returned to law with a different focus. She established a nonprofit organization specializing in family court accountability, using her technological expertise to create tools for other jurisdictions. Her methods for protecting witnesses and securing evidence became templates for anti-corruption efforts nationwide. The city itself underwent transformation. New policies emphasized prevention over punishment, support over surveillance, and healing over retribution. The movement had not just exposed corruption, it had redefined what justice could mean. And in the process, it had shown that even the darkest systems could be dismantled, one star at a time. The walls between communities began to dissolve as people recognized their shared vulnerability to corruption and their collective power to fight it. International observers came to study the changes, amazed by how thoroughly a corrupt system could be reformed when people united against it. The Elena Rodriguez Center became a symbol of possibility, proving that even the most entrenched corruption could be overcome. Local schools incorporated the story into their curriculum, teaching students about civic responsibility and the importance of speaking truth to power. The star counting system became a metaphor for maintaining vigilance and hope in dark times. As spring arrived, bringing new warmth to the city, the final pieces of resolution fell into place. The last conspirators were sentenced, their appeals exhausted. The last facilities were reformed or closed. The last hidden accounts were uncovered and seized. But perhaps the most meaningful resolution came in quiet moments. Ella sleeping peacefully through the night, Jason finding joy in mentoring young officers, Elena watching her daughter play without fear. The stars still shone overhead, but now they witnessed healing instead of hiding, truth instead of terror. In her official statement at the center's opening, Elena captured the essence of their resolution, Asterisk, justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It's about creating systems so transparent, so accountable, that corruption withers in the light. We counted stars to find our way through darkness. Now we count them to remember why we must never let that darkness return. Asterisk, the winter snow continued to fall, but this time it felt cleansing rather than threatening, covering the old scars while preserving the lessons learned. Sometimes the best resolution isn't just ending something bad, but building something better in its place. Family formation. The process of rebuilding family bonds proved as intricate as dismantling corruption, but infinitely more rewarding. One crisp autumn morning, exactly 18 months after the parking lot incident, Ella gained not just a legal guardian in Jason, but an entire extended family that defied conventional boundaries. The adoption ceremony reflected their unique journey. In an unprecedented arrangement, the court recognized multiple guardians, Elena as primary parent, Jason as legal protector, and the Rodriguez grandparents as cultural custodians. Sarah Martinez became godmother, her fierce dedication to justice honored with a formal family role. Their living arrangement evolved organically. Elena and Ella occupied the main part of a renovated Victorian house, ironically painted with blue doors at Ella's insistence. Jason lived in the attached apartment, close enough for security but respecting boundaries. The grandparents moved into the garden cottage, their presence completing a protective circle around their granddaughter. Family dynamics developed their own rhythm. Weekly Sunday dinners became a tradition, with each person contributing dishes from their heritage. Jason taught Ella self-defense disguised as dance moves. Elena and her parents healed their relationship through shared storytelling. Sarah brought case files for review, turning work into family bonding. The household created new rituals that honored their shared trauma while celebrating their survival. Stargazing sessions now included astronomy lessons and cultural stories. Security protocols became treasure hunt games. Code words evolved into a private family language. Their hypervigilance transformed into mutual protection. Therapy played a crucial role, with both individual and family sessions helping them navigate their unique relationships. The therapist noted how they created a constellation family, each member a distinct star, together forming something greater than their parts. Education became a family project. Ella attended a progressive school that understood her special circumstances, while home learning incorporated elements from everyone's expertise. Elena taught critical thinking through coding games. Jason shared investigation techniques through puzzles. The grandparents passed down cultural wisdom through stories. Sarah contributed lessons in justice and advocacy. Their home security system, designed by Elena, reflected their evolution. While thoroughly protective, it emphasized connection over isolation. Windows remained transparent but secure. Doors welcomed visitors while screening threats, and surveillance cameras doubled as stargazing equipment. The media's interest in their unusual family arrangement gradually shifted from sensation to celebration. They became an example of how trauma could forge new kinds of bonds. Our family could be defined by choice as much as blood, Elena wrote in her journal. Legal frameworks struggled to categorize their arrangement, eventually creating new precedents for non-traditional family structures in cases involving institutional trauma. Their model inspired other survivors to form similar support networks. Most remarkably, they maintained connections with other families from the conspiracy case. Regular gatherings brought together children and parents who understood each other's experiences, creating a broader community of healing and support. Ella flourished in this unconventional environment. Her art evolved from dark surveillance scenes to vibrant family portraits. Her star patterns became constellation maps, marking happy memories instead of escape routes. She developed an uncanny ability to make others feel safe, turning her own healing into a gift for others. The blue doors of their home became a symbol of transformation, no longer representing a safe house, but a gathering place for hope. Their security cameras captured more birthday celebrations than threats, more loving embraces than defensive postures. As Elena noted in her family journal, we didn't just survive trauma, we alchemized it into something precious. Our family isn't defined by what we suffered, but by how we chose to heal together. They still counted stars every night. But now the ritual included stories, laughter, and dreams of the future. Their constellation family proved that sometimes the most beautiful formations arise not from traditional patterns, but from the courage to create something entirely new. The Blue Victorian became known in the neighborhood as the House of Stars, a place where broken pieces had been reformed into something stronger, where trauma had transformed into triumph, and where love had proven more powerful than fear. In the years that followed, their story became more than just a testament to survival. It evolved into a beacon of hope that inspired lasting change. 10 years after the parking lot incident, Ella, now 13, stood before a congressional committee, her mother beside her, testifying about institutional reform and the power of resilience. The impact of their case had rippled far beyond their city. 20 states adopted Elena's law, mandating transparent family court proceedings. The STAR protocol became standard procedure for protecting whistleblowers. Jason's police training program expanded nationwide. International guidelines for child protection incorporated their safety measures. Ella grew into her role as an unexpected symbol of hope. Her childhood trauma transformed into extraordinary empathy and insight. She established a youth advocacy network, helping other children navigate the system while teaching them her mother's star counting technique as a tool for resilience. The House of Stars evolved into a community center while remaining their home. Its programs included support groups for families fighting institutional corruption, legal clinics staffed by attorneys trained in Elena's methods, technology workshops teaching digital safety and evidence preservation, and cultural healing programs led by the Rodriguez grandparents. Elena's technological innovations revolutionized child protection. Real-time tracking systems for court cases prevented manipulation. Secure communication networks protected vulnerable families. Artificial intelligence tools flagged patterns of corruption. Blockchain technology secured evidence chains. Jason found peace in mentoring others. His training academy became renowned for producing officers who prioritized justice over power, understanding over force. Sarah's memory lived on through a scholarship fund for children affected by systemic corruption. The Rodriguez grandparents' quiet wisdom influenced international approaches to resistance and resilience. Their model of patient documentation and strategic silence became part of training programs worldwide. Their family structure became a template for trauma-informed community building. The constellation model they created inspired new approaches to support and protection. Multifamily housing cooperatives, integrated security networks, collective childcare systems, and shared advocacy resources. Elena's art evolved into powerful installations combining technology and storytelling. Her most famous piece, Counting Stars, used interactive projections to help visitors understand both the terror and the triumph of her journey. It toured globally, touching millions. The city itself became a model for transformation. Transparent government initiatives, community-led oversight committees, integrated family support services, and proactive corruption prevention programs reshaped its identity. On clear nights, visitors to the House of Stars might still find them on the roof garden, teaching new generations to find patterns in the darkness. But now the lessons went beyond survival. They spoke of hope, justice, and the power of collective resistance. Elena's final book, Constellations of Change, captured their journey's essence. We started counting stars to survive the night. We continued counting them to remember our strength. Now we count them to light the way for others. The future they built wasn't perfect, but it was honest. A continuous work of creation and protection, powered by love and illuminated by truth. Their story proved that even the deepest wounds could become wellsprings of hope, that trauma could be transformed into wisdom, that fear could give way to fierce, protective love. As Ella told the Congressional Committee, the stars taught us that light travels far, that patterns hold meaning, and that even in the darkest night, we're never truly alone. Asterisk. Our job now is to be the stars for others, steady, bright, and always pointing toward hope. Their constellation family continued to grow, adding new points of light with each person they helped, each system they changed, each truth they protected. They had learned that the future isn't just something that happens. It's something we build together, one star at a time, until the darkness gives way to dawn. In the end, their greatest legacy wasn't just surviving corruption or exposing truth. It was proving that hope, like starlight, can travel infinite distances to touch lives yet unknown, illuminating paths toward justice for generations to come. Dear friends, if this powerful story of justice, love, and redemption has touched your heart, please consider supporting our team by subscribing to our channel. Each subscription helps us continue sharing these important narratives that shine light on truth and inspire change. Don't forget to hit the like button and share this video with your family and friends. Your support spreads these crucial messages to those who need to hear them. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. How did this story affect you? What moments resonated most deeply? Together, we can build a community dedicated to protecting truth and justice. Thank you for being part of our journey. Let's keep counting stars together. Glowing star.